For those that I have not yet met who have just joined for this session, I'm Tim Doberman. I'm the Director of Research for IGC, as well as a research fellow at the London School of Economics. And I'll spend maybe 15 minutes at most arguing just the economic case for renewable energy in Pakistan. So I will not make environmental arguments, even though they are very relevant for this. I will not make arguments with respect to climate change, even though they are very relevant for this question as well. I will start with 5 facts that I think are relevant for this debate. They are probably quite familiar to all of you, but I think this will be a good way, and I'll be intentionally provocative and quite bullish on solar and renewables, and I'm doing that in the spirit of generating a good discussion. So this first graph is plotting what's called an experience curve. It's showing how the costs of renewables have fallen dramatically in the last 3 or 4 decades. The vertical axis is a logarithmic scale showing the levelized cost of electricity for solar on the left and wind on the right. The horizontal axis is time, and you can see the black dots trace the actual evolution of solar and wind levelized costs. This is a global average across time. The red lines, which you might see, these red horizontal lines in the graph, those represent all of the IEA and other leading forecasts of what the prices for solar and wind would have been. As you can see, the prices have fallen far more than every single prediction has made, and far more rapidly than has been predicted. And this has led even the IEA to announce in, I think, 2020 that solar is the cheapest electricity mankind has ever known. So there's this big global trend, which we're all familiar with, on technological progress in solar and wind technologies. I should add that this exact same power law, as you can characterize this, has been applied to batteries as well. So there's a very bullish case at the global level for a lot of technological innovations bringing down costs of renewables. The second fact is, and this is perhaps unsurprising, is that a lot of the core innovations that have brought down the cost of fossil fuels have more or less been realized. And I'm willing to be challenged on that point, but there's less clear of an argument to make that fossil fuel costs are going to be following a similar cost decline in terms of relative costs that we are expecting in renewables. In Pakistan, we know that Pakistan is kind of grateful to have hydropower as a core part of its electricity mix. But one discussion point which comes up is how much can Pakistan's grid handle variable electricity supply? And so I've pulled this from a World Bank study a few years ago on the ability to integrate variable electricity into Pakistan's power grid. Let's look at a few of these lines. So the solid blue line was the government renewable energy policy targets. The red line represents the Plexos optimum. So this is a grid-based modeling projection of what is the optimal share of variable renewable electricity in the electricity mix overall. As you know, Pakistan is nowhere near 30%, which is what the projection is for the fiscal year of 2028, 2029, in terms of what would be the grid optimal. And so what this is saying, and I should make clear that this analysis, as far as I'm aware, engineers can challenge me, this analysis does not actually include additional transmission grid investments up until 2028, 2029. So what this is saying is that the grid today can actually handle a reasonable amount of renewable integration, variable supply in it already. So that's not to say that we don't need to make big improvements in the grid system. That's very clear. But I think the point is that for Pakistan, which has effectively fraction or only a few percentage points of variable renewable in the electricity mix now, the grid itself can handle much more today. The fourth fact is that despite having huge potential in this sector, Pakistan has not yet been able to take full advantage of this. And this is just provocative on purpose, but if you look at the comparator of Western India, where they share, Pakistan and India obviously share the Thar Desert, among others, there is a lot more investment in India. In Rajasthan, for instance, there is already 24 gigawatts of installed capacity of solar. Pakistan's 2030 goal is only 13 gigawatts. And in India, you're getting extremely competitive tariffs. So again, in Western India, the regulated tariffs in Gujarat and Rajasthan are around 6-7 PKR per unit. There's, of course, a lot of government subsidy and support behind a lot of this. But what this is showing is that Pakistan has really tremendous geographic potential to follow suit and to make large investments into renewables and get very cheap tariffs for that investment. Yes, that's in rupees. I converted that to rupees. Yeah. The last fact, which we've already discussed in the morning, is that perhaps one of the largest constraints, if not the largest constraint, is that there is a large amount of surplus capacity in the system. So this is just showing you every single IPP. The height of the bar is the capacity of the IPP project, and the width is showing for how long it's running. So you can see that there's a huge chunk that is in the system now until 2040, or at least the late 2030s. And a lot of this was signed very recently in the last decade or so. Now, we don't need to kind of redig old graves, but I think there's certainly some concerns that some of these may not have been procured at the most competitive rates. But even disregarding this, the fact is that if you have this much capacity, solar or wind will only now be feeding into the future demand growth. It will not be able to displace this existing capacity unless we decide to somehow prematurely close these contracts. So these are 5 facts which I think characterize the opportunity and some of the challenge in Pakistan. What I want to touch on as a case study is an example of one country which has quite radically transformed its power sector in the span of only a few years, and that's Vietnam. So in 2018, Pakistan had more solar in its electricity mix than Vietnam. Today, Vietnam has as much solar as Germany and Japan. And that was really only accomplished in 3 or 4 years. How did Vietnam do this? There was extremely strong government support. They had a feed-in tariff of around $93 per megawatt hour for 20 years. I would argue that's probably too high, but in their context, they had a supply deficit, so they needed to bring in more capacity. So the government was quite willing to give very generous rates, perhaps overly generous rates, but they had a very high upfront tariff for 20 years. But they also had competition, so you don't have a single buyer. You had the ability to do bilateral PPAs with large off-takers. You could also sell straight to end users. And then the general other types of policy instruments, tariff exemptions, benefits, tax, etc. And interestingly, a lot of the demand here was also coming from the environmental lens. There's a demand to reduce air pollution. And there's certainly, at least in Vietnam, a sense that solar would help address that problem by offsetting or displacing kind of dirtier forms of generation. So Vietnam gives hope in some sense that you can make quite dramatic reversals and introductions in variable electricity supply into the grids in short periods of time. And part of what I wanted to discuss today is how much can we replicate of Vietnam and Pakistan, what is different. Of course, lots is so much different, but what are some of the key sticking points here that mean that this story can't be applied here? So just to close, a few points that I think stand out that Pakistan is relatively unique in, or that make this case even stronger. First is the complementarities with hydropower. So whether that's for grid balancing in terms of hydropower having relatively faster ramp rates, but also from storage. This is not being exploited yet right now, but you could think about hydro pump storage as something that can help balance the intermittency of renewables in a future setup. But having hydro makes this much, much easier overall. I think renewables can offer cheap power for industry. I think we need to really think about, as we discussed in the first session, the economic implications of having expensive electricity for job creation, for exports, for growth. Faraz touched on this briefly in his first presentation. With a cleaner electricity mix, that does make it more attractive for foreign supply chains. But there's also the external regulatory risk for things like the EU's carbon border adjustment mechanism. So this will not hit Pakistan in the short term. So it'll implement in 2026, and that will mostly hit sectors like steel, fertilizer, etc. But it's very likely, and now everything is pointing towards this being extended much more broadly, including into other sectors like textiles afterwards. The way that works, if you're not familiar, is that if you do not have an equivalent carbon price, they will take the average electricity mix, if you will, for an industry and charge a carbon price on top of that. So the more thermal you have in your national grid, the more you will be taxed. And that's just applied across all industry from that country. And then lastly, you have a unique challenge of solar and wind being all upfront capex, which has a kind of a fiscal implication up front in terms of this needs to all be imported. But that needs to be balanced with the benefit of the flow, where you don't need to import fuel and other sources of generation afterwards. And so, you can argue, I don't know, maybe this is me being too loose, but I would argue that it is some form of indigenous supply. At least once it's set up, it is definitely indigenous. So to close, just some observations and let's say ideas, I don't want to say solutions, to discuss. So the sense that I get from others is that stability is king. I think this is obvious. Macroeconomic, regulatory, policy stability, all of this is what's essential for the sector, to know that I can come in as a private investor and I can ensure I get the returns on my investment. I think an interesting avenue which is opening up, which is competition. So ideally, this is the economist speaking here, we want to have a horse race between energy technologies. Okay, of course there's cost, there is value in terms of grid stability from having capacity that's dispatchable. So we can maybe just say not just cost, but dispatchable value as well. But I think the introduction of more bilateral contracting through CTBCM and more generally auctions for price discovery in solar and wind are all very, very positive developments. And I think that will allow the market to really come in and demonstrate that you can get quite competitive rates. Obviously, to foster competition and to get great results from that, you need the stability in the first point. Thirdly, I think this is an interesting area which I am no expert on, but I think there's scope to explore, which is the avenues for international climate financing, especially to also address the large existing capacity question. I think there's no doubt that the contracts financially should be honored, but one could make a case that perhaps there's an arrangement where you finance the early closure of an existing less efficient thermal contract. So maybe some mid-sized natural gas plant that's already kind of 15, 20 years in. You can finance the closure of this using international climate financing to then say this will be replaced one for one with solar and wind. So in some sense, that's an offset. If we take out 100 megawatts of fossil fuels, and if we say that we will use this financing to shut that contract down and replace it with 100 megawatts of solar, personally, I think there would be a lot of financial interest in a trade like that as well. So that's something we can consider. And then the last 2 points are enhancing domestic capital, I think is very important, especially given the concerns around cost indexation that have plagued the thermal IPPs and are also plaguing the foreign investors in the renewable space. So how can we broaden local concessional financing? State Bank has a preliminary concessionary loan scheme, but that is often quite small and restricted and might not cover and does not cover storage, for instance, and has quite limited coverage overall for larger scale solar. So that could be an area, for instance, to consider more. And then lastly, I think there's a serious discussion on what is the right policy instrument to strike this balance between the contract tenor, the duration, and with providing incentives for investors, to the necessary incentives for investors given the investment risks to come in. I think there's much more scope to be creative in the duration, the cost indexation, and other aspects in these contracts as well. And then infrastructure, I think, is a given, and we can discuss that. Great. I will end there. I think hopefully that lays some ideas for a good discussion, and I look forward to hearing the comments.
Thank you, Tim, for this wonderful presentation. I would like to have a small round of introductions so that we all know who has joined and so that it will be easy for us to address them and ask questions. I'll start with Akil Saab.
I am Akil Jaffrey, Director Policy and International Cooperation at
Head of the Market Development at NEPRA.
My name is Adil Bandyal. I'm a lawyer practicing in the energy sector.
Zahra Salman, CEO, CDPR.
Zishan Ashfaq, I'm heading Renewable Space.
Irvina Malik, I'm a consultant with the World Bank.
I'm Kazim Said, I'm with the World Bank.
Yahya Bajwa, I'm an independent consultant working with private sector as well as with World Bank and IGC.
Manahil Raza, Energy Specialist at the World Bank.
Shahryar has the Petroleum Institute of
I'm Maila Mujib, CEO of Platinum, that's a project development and advisory company and energy transition decarbonization. And I sit on the Global Council of Energy Transition of the World Economic Forum. And a number of companies that were mentioned earlier, I was on the boards of CDPR, the distribution companies and
I'm Adil Nafuda, faculty at IT Karachi.
Tim Doberman, the Director of Research, IGC.
Numair Liaquat, Country Economist at IGC.
Faraz Hayat, I'm a postdoc at the IGC. Juan Faiz, I'm a lawyer working in the council.
Shah Khan, Project Manager, Energy Refinement and Investor PhD.
Naveen Ahmed, IGC.
Thank you, everyone. Yes, please continue.
From Islamabad Policy Research Institute.
I am Ahmed Qazi from CPDAG.
I'm Akash Ahmed, working as Additional Manager Market Development CPP.
This is Farooq Kuban, I'm the designer simulation working on CTPC and 06. This is the team from British IT.
Anis from the LFP World Bank.
Mina Sheikh, IGC.
So that is doubly sure that nobody
There also.
Sergeant Faiz, Country Economist at the IGC.
Thank you. I'll ask Akil Saab to jump in and specifically answer a couple of questions. So first of all, what are the barriers and challenges for the renewable transition that the government is facing? We know that PPIB tried to set up this auction, but the bids didn't come in. Secondly, I would also want to know about your opinions on the policy frameworks and regulatory frameworks that are lacking in the sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Numair. Wonderful presentation, Tim, and you have left everyone with good points to ponder onto. I think we've been trying. The government has had the vision of increasing the share of renewables for the last decade or so. Starting off with the first renewable energy policy that was not pretty much target oriented, and then coming up with the new policy in 2019, which had set the targets based on some studies that were done by the World Bank, and and those studies clearly showed that even with existing grid network, we can go to a share of more than 37% in the national grid. And one point is pretty much clear that with the costs of technology of solar and wind going down, they are the cheapest sources of energy. And if we are to decrease the electricity prices in tariffs in Pakistan, adding more renewable is one of the main will be the one of the main contributors in that. Apart from the governance and structural reforms that are required within the power sector and in the distribution network. The issues that we have been facing lately since the announcement of the new policy, there has always I think we are still on the learning curve when it comes to planning. We came up with the IGSEP in 2021, and as Bhutto Saab rightly mentioned, that we are still sticking up with that. The committed projects dilemma. Why committed? Why can't we have a free run IGSEP and that decides purely on a least cost basis that what is the best capacity, what are the best capacity addition options for the future to come? Until and unless, and that has happened in this IGSEP, that the committed projects have washed away all the wind and solar capacity additions in the next 10 years due to decrease in demand. And in this situation of decreased demand, which has occurred in last 1.5 year, due to which is a result of increase in prices and consumers opting to more energy efficient measures or not utilizing electricity at all at times. The target of government achieving 30% share seems very optimistic now. Doesn't seem very optimistic now. We have faced issues with in the planning in terms of planning the capacity additions and planning of the grid evacuation facilities. For example, a project which was committed to be inducted in 2024 in the previous IGSEP now is falling in 2028, 29 because the project is ready and it can achieve financial close maybe in a year's time, but the evacuation facilities, the TCEP has showed that evacuation can't be available till 28, 29. So that has been an issue. The curtailment of wind power projects, existing ones, although 2 years ago, NTC was of the view that there's evacuation available in the south for another 500 megawatts of wind, but 6 months down the road there was congestion in the from transmission network from south to north, and we are facing curtailment of 700 up to 700 megawatts of wind power projects, which is also adding up to the cost of of electricity for the consumers. I think going forward, and now the discussion is that achieving target is one thing, but how can we add more renewables, which will surely decrease the price of electricity in a scenario when we don't need capacity addition, considering the committed projects we have in the pipeline. And the other issue is I think, which has been highlighted earlier on the outset by Jahanzeb Saab also, is the financing of these projects, financing of the grid infrastructure projects, financing of renewable energy projects. What I believe that was the main reason of failure of the bidding process we had was the non-availability of financing, or even if it was available, that was available at a very high interest rate. People in the market talking about LIBOR plus 12% as compared to LIBOR plus 4%, on which actual transactions have happened in 2 years ago. So that's an issue, and we need to tap the available, as also highlighted in one of your points, that we need to tap the concessional financing available through different funds, the climate funds or different donor agencies. I think one other aspect is that we have the work is being done in silos in Pakistan. We need to shift from a power policy towards an integrated energy policy, cover all the sectors of economy if we want to have a sustainable development and increase the footprint of renewables in Pakistan. Uh, when we talk about CBAM hitting the textile industry in future, maybe they will be able to cope with that because they'll have the option to set up they are already setting up their own solar based capacity on their rooftops. Maybe they can set up small scale solar projects and earn CERs, or it will be much cheaper for them to buy carbon credits from the market and offset their requirements. And but when we talk about a cohesive cross sectoral policy, energy policy that covers all sectors of economy, agriculture, petroleum, and everything, transport, I think that then we'll be able to have a sustainable sort of master plan for the future, a roadmap for the future, in which we can actually define what we are to do and how we can make the all sectors of economy sustainable, and especially that will also help bringing the power sector in a increasing the share of power sector renewables in the power sector in a sustainable manner. I think there are certain other, as already discussed in the previous discourse, that uh, there are things linked with the increase in share of renewables which are which are needed to be done. For example, demand side measures. We need to bring in behavior change, maybe incentivize people in such a way that we can make shift the demand from which is currently the peak demand occurring in later in the evening these days, whereas we have cheaper source of available during the afternoon at noon. uh, we need to tap into the potential of EVs and battery charging stations coming up, and maybe provide certain incentive that if you use electricity between 12 at 11 a.m. to 3 a.m. you'll be charged at 0.8% of the actual tariff rate. So there is a shift in demand from later evenings and later afternoons to towards noon, in which we have the actual cheaper electricity available from solar. In one of the studies that was done by Danish Energy Agency, this was all being discussed in the context of not targeting anything towards climate change mitigation and not taking into account that aspect. But if we are to talk about achieving net zero by 2050 or 2060, that study showed that for that for a net zero to be achieved in 2060 or earlier in 2050, a lot of investment would be required in the wind energy apart from solar, because it covers solar is partly available at daytime, but a lot of investment would be required in hydros and in wind. And if that is not the case, and if we are in a constrained financial financing situation that persists for next 10 15 years, then we'll end up having a lot of share of thermal and coal still operating in the system, with the prices of electricity remaining the same or increasing further, adding to the circular debt. So or the other option would be to end up with unmet energy demand by 2050. And with that also we will have to use battery storage options and flexible hydro scheduling. We have examples, global examples, in which like country like Denmark, they have made they have chosen the path of making the transition in a way that they have increased the flexibility of their existing even coal power plants, providing flexibility to the system. Why can't we do that in Pakistan? It's just a matter of deciding that we need to increase the share right now, add more renewables, restructure our PPAs in such a way that they remain the efficient thermal power plants remain within the system, but they are more flexible, and we do away with the non-efficient thermal power plants, for which again we will require financing to be tapped from different sources, which is concessional and not a burden on government's economy. So I think the question is that I would like to hear feedback from all the stakeholders that in this constrained demand scenario, what are the ways in which we can still add renewables, because surely that will decrease the electricity price in Pakistan. I think that's the most important point to be discussed.
Thank you, Keel Saab, for posing this question, and also for highlighting the need for this inclusive, comprehensive policy that deals with all the different sectors of the economy, plus also highlighting the need for a demand load shifting mechanism. I'll move over to Bhutto Saab. So the specific questions, Bhutto Saab, you need to answer here are that why is the government sticking to the committed projects under IGCEP? Why is it not flexible? Why can't we move towards renewables? Secondly, how do you see the tariffs dropping due to this rise in solar across the country, and if the transition takes place? Thank you.
Thank you, Numair. I think for the net zero targets, there is no doubt that if your environment can sustain 34 billion tons of CO2, if you reach to 50 billion tons, 2-degree rise, life is erased. So everybody is thinking serious on that one. More of seriousness has to come from the developed countries. They had to build $100 billion fund on that one, on their previous commitments. And then also on the developing countries, country like Pakistan with 13% year-on-year reduction in demand, and then that is morely on the industrial and commercial side, and then the rise on the domestic side, the 80% consumption coming from the residential, in a 4 trillion sector with a country with a 9 trillion budget. So subsidized with 1 trillion altogether, with the demand that let's shut all the power plants, terminate all the plants and put renewables without knowing that, no, I have the EPP energy cost is 5 cents. 5 cents. You asked the first question from Akil, was that the macroeconomic conditions were a policy issue or a tariff issue in 600 megawatt? We couldn't find any bid or something like that. And says, first was the reverse auction against the 4 cents, nobody come, and then all of sudden question, hey, it's the bad tariff. Very good. Nepra, this is okay, let's go on. And second round, open. Everybody came, and then nobody, even in open competitor, at least one should have come and said, here you go with the 10 cents. Even we did not got it that one. Okay, a good one. We are running the 45,000 megawatt with 2.8 trillion circular date, and then 300 billion non-recoveries and so subsidies plug in. At the net 20%, 30% payments to the PPs are on delayed. We given a very dedicated account to that one. Also, you would be given the first priority, even. Let's know. So it might not be contributed to the policy and regulatory things. I have a straight answer. That was the macroeconomic conditions and altogether. Investor are the, markets are efficient, investors are rational. This is very clear that we have to think that why this auction was not there. But we had to think that was a little cent on that one. Framework. There are no upfront regimes in the future. Gone. There was a fight between upfront tariff and cost plus. The cost plus win it from 2005 to 13 and 14. Now there is a fight between the cost plus and price discovery through the auctions, your point. So I think very little room is left for the cost plus, maybe 5-10%. Every capacity in the future that has to come against the discourse capacity obligations is through the auctions. That's what is procurement regulation notified, aligned with the National Electricity Policy and Plan in 2022. So auction is the future. Now, what is the room left exactly coming on the committed projects with the demand reducing and altogether in an earlier session? Furthermore, adding in other committed projects, may it be the XYZ, whatsoever, you are basically, we have 13,000, 16,000, not to be precise, 13,000 uncommitted, 16,000 project, 70% is coming from the public sector, WAPDA, and that's under construction. We do not see discourse demand, we do not see their power acquisition program. What to do with this construction? 600 megawatt is coming from the KP. And 60% of these PP are already signed. Without knowing the impact that we talk about the long-term planning, we are falling into a short-term planning. People say do long-term planning for the 10 years, IGSEP, TSEP, we are doing. That's wonderful. But at least we had a power purchase price forecast by the system operator and the procurer in a 1 year for the year 2023 that our PPP was 22 rupees 43 paisas. If that was that precise, then we should, and that was based on a certain dispatch criteria and then generation mix, then why we have in January and February 4 rupees, 7 rupees mix on that one? That means we fail in a 1 year forecast, that even down the 1 year line, we do not know in January whether we would be knowing to operate the RLNG or not. We forecasted that in January 8,000 demand, we would be pulling out all the nuclear from the south and all the coal and all together, practically ended with the transmission constraints with the fact that, strategic tables comes in for the HVDC of 4,000 megawatt, for which 65 billion rupees at the 4,000 capacity is to be paid by the consumers. We cannot run it in winter more than 2,000 megawatts because of instability, low demand, because our low duration curve is that 24,000 and 12,000 in winter. When you reduce that one, you couldn't evacuate the cheaper and then nuclear and so. Eventually, you had to operate with the RLNG and then the RFO and so. This is something there we need to improve on the short-term planning and on the long-term planning. On the committed side, I think there's a room. Since the demand is reducing, even the public sector projects are there, PSDB funds are there, and there are a lot of donors and will build for this 13,000 megawatt. I earlier said 45,000 megawatt, the capability to consume as a 240 million nation is 150. At bus bar, we generate 150 billion units. 20% we lose. We invoice 130, and capability to produce at 250 billion units. Assets utilization is 45%, and thereby meaning 70% in 23 rupees, 70 rupees is your capacity cost, and EPP cost should be the vice versa. Should have been the vice versa. Energy cost would have been the 60-70%. The best mix should give you 40-60, or the most ideal should give you 70-30, so that you can optimize your energy costs. You have put a capacity in a way that you want to. You need to look it forward. I call upon you people that you have now a new IGSEP coming. There was an approved IGSEP that has a 22,000 committed project, 8,000 for wind and solar. Now they are gone because demand is reserved. To put in numbers, 1 year before we said that our country current 150 billion unit demand in next year would go to 275 billion units. Immediate after 1 year now we are saying no, it's 180 billion. So we are growing by 30 billion in next year. A year before we said we would grow it by 150 billion. So energy demand came down. 1 year before we had a plan that our peak would rise to 65,000. These are IGSEP numbers. 65,000 from peak of 25 to 65. So we will put 32,000. So energy, and that has come down to 37. So in a year now, which is more precise and realistic. I think this is good. Good for assets are there, you cannot utilize. So you need to go back, review it, saying, hey, you're committed. Now optimize is no space, like Akhil said. Forget about that renewable. I mean, if renewable is coming, and again, not to digress, on 4 cents, is it really a 4 cents? No. Who will pay for the flexibility, stability, and everything? Put the battery for 4 cents, 8 cents, and all together. Putting in numbers, last month 5 billion part load was given to the RLNG plants. You would ask, say, why? You have the just net metering. In the day, every net metering is coming. Now for the whole of Pakistan, you have to put a 50 hertz frequency, 220 and 500 voltage, and so. So you ramp down that. You cannot shut down this RLNG plants and coal, and so if you shut it down, what happens? The clouds comes and every frequency down, so you are in blackout. So what we call this is that to give a flexibility, you keep on running on part load to the RLNG, and altogether who paid? Net meter 3-phase, the elite class was benefited, and then part loads were running, and that part load cost was got socialized to whom? The rest of the consumers who are not net meters, and altogether this has the cost also. We need to see it from the flexibility, stability perspective also. If adding the flexibility cost, the renewable is coming to me as in a developing nation for the 8 cents, it's better to dispatch the coal, which is 5 cents, I would say. So that at the end, I love to have be sustainable, but I would sustain. Prior, I need to have affordability and then reliability for that one. If I'm not reliable and affordable, how can I achieve to this sustainability? So concluding, revisit. You have base scenario, high scenario, low scenario. Forget the high scenario and then low scenario. On the low scenario basis, with the horse race between technology and altogether, like Masood Saab said, if you are putting us 45 rupees per unit, thereby meaning by 16 cents, thereby meaning you are forcing me to go to the distributed, put a 4 cents solar, 6 cents battery, 10 cents and diesel generator. In 16 cents, I make a small grid, such a beautiful grid that I don't rely on you. I can operate it, dispatch it at my own, like it's a biggest province. And from policy side, 80% consumption center is thinking like this. So you will not. We are discussing a term that the consumer is defecting the grid. It's a very small term. Consumer is now deserting your grid. It will make it desert like.
Thank you, Bhutto Saab. Thank you for the response, and thank you for.
So do an analysis on that scenario of a IGSAP. What if this committed path is taken on affordability and sustainability? Because now we are making ourselves happy that we were 4 cents with solar and bagasse in renewable. We put hydro, we are 30 cents. Since future is coming hydro, we would be 53% with the hydro. Analyze the scenario that what if we delay this one and put wind and solar, that the policy level, all the subjective statements are going on. Objectively, we need to give up one analysis, and researchers like you, I think this is very small work. For me, is a big work. You do that one. Take IGSAP, take TSAP, that is available.
Thank you, Bhutto
Saab. Give the space.
Thank you for pointing out that Pakistan went wrong with the demand forecasting, and therefore the IGSAP is not meeting the requirements. And also Bhutto Saab here has raised concerns regarding the flexibility, intermittency, and eventually the affordability and the declining cost of solar, and we can come to the discussants to get their input on this. Moving on, I would ask Umar Masood Saab to give us the perspective of the provincial government. Solar has been on the rise, and discos and the federation feel that net metering is causing them some damage in the form of capacity payments. So, Umar Masood Saab, how do you think this conflict can be resolved, and can provinces and federation actually coordinate this challenge with each other? Thank you.
Starting from how this conflict can be resolved, I think we do not realize that there is a conflict. So we do not want to address the conflict, and basically this situation is that the federal government is doing what it is doing through NEPRA and all other agencies at the federal level, and the provincial government is doing what it is doing with its priorities, is that we will somehow make renewable energy, which presumably is low cost, available to a large segment of the population, or to for example, the agriculture sector. So irrigation tube wells, there's a big massive program of solarizing them, or it's something in the works. The discussion we just had, like in the last half an hour, is uh, is quite a common discussion, that there is this side of the floor which is saying that this is an opportunity that we have to realize, and then there is this side of the floor which is saying that this opportunity is not possible. uh, my sort of 2 cents on it is that I think that would be a very unhelpful way of moving forward. So let's make a economist assumption that this side does not exist. So you just assume us away. Tim Doberman can assume us away in his model and say that, I don't know, I don't like the color of his tie, so I'm just, trying to assume us away. And then, work through it. Work what you are actually proposing. Because if I look at your 1 to 6, the provincial government is more like the 6 type. So we think it's an infrastructure issue. We build it and they will come, and how we get onto the grid or how we get off the grid, that is something that we'll work through. I mean, this issue is raised that whenever we talk about solar projects which the provincial government wants to finance or to work on or to incentivize, there is an issue of grid and how we would distribute it. By the way, one of our power companies, provincial power companies, actually has a transmission license. How it got that transmission license, that's a totally separate story. But it has actually got a transmission license. Coming to firms and businesses, I think what he pointed out is a matter of great concern. In Faisalabad, there are two massive industrial estates in which uh, previous governments, I think 3 or 4 governments, have put in a lot of money. They are ideally located, from an agglomeration point of view, that city has a lot to offer. And finally, when they energized one of the industrial estates, nobody wants to buy that energy. It's just too expensive. So what is happening is that they are simply saying that we would come and colonize the estate, but we will not buy the energy. Now, from the industrial estate company point of view, their entire whole business model is falling apart because nobody is buying their energy. So this number 6 approach is basically just go ahead and see what happens, but sometimes it might work and sometimes it might not work. Stability is king. Number 1, that is way above my pay grade. It is more like king is stability over here. It's so. Let me be very frank. Number 2, nobody talks about competition. We all talk about autonomy a lot. I want autonomy. The provinces want autonomy. We need private sector to be autonomous. But the competition aspect, I think, from a policy perspective and a civil service perspective, we just have not got hang of what competition means. I mean, I'm making an honest confession. What does competition mean in the energy market? I don't know. And I think that many of my colleagues would also be blank on this one. So there is a lot to be said about that. Uh, After number 6, this number 3 is a latest entrant, which is harnessing international climate finance. So all of a sudden, in the last year and a half, somehow a silver bullet has emerged that there's a pot of money somewhere in the world with our name on it. We just have to package it into climate finance, and dollars would actually start flowing in. IMF has now even got a climate finance facility. Uh, I don't know about this. Once again, I'm sorry. In some of the sort of actions that you have put in, and I'm blank about it because that is what it is. So we have provincial governments which are looking at this thing from an infrastructure point of view, but there is a very strong policy push at the political level that renewables can somehow make the energy price cheaper without taking into account what has been just said by Bhutto Saab. Uh, Nobody wants to hear that story. The Secretary Energy repeats it in front of the Chief Minister, in front of the Chairman PND, and that is acknowledged. I mean, there is no pushback against it, but somehow it is acknowledged, and then we sort of move forward. Uh, redesign of PPPs, PPA, strike balance between tenor and with center incentives. I think this is still because the PPAs are with the federal government. So if from a provincial perspective, if this is the roadmap that you are actually giving us, I can tell you that we will be working on six a lot. We'll be thinking in the medium term on something happening on three. Foster competition, it is very amorphous. Yes, immediately, but how? I mean, what is competition in the energy sector? Is it like everybody races to a finish line? Because I have that schoolboy sort of a mentality that is perhaps competition or getting an A grade or something. But what is competition in the energy sector? And the civil service in Pakistan is really poor on understanding competition. It's very good on the legal side. It can understand the lacuna. It can even also get to the costing of it. But I think understanding competition and how legal and regulatory framework foster that is something which is hard to come by. So where we stand is that there is, as I said before, uh, there is a lot of pressure on us to bring down energy costs. And at a provincial level, the provincial government of Punjab feels that it has the finances and it can make these type of interventions. I would be very much interested, although this is not related to you, what's happening in Kasur, in where you are trying to finance through some type of a low credit scheme through a Huvat. Again, that thing is not on our radar, but that is something that I would, if we want to go move towards affordability of energy, that would be perhaps a way to go. Otherwise, having said this, what's happening right now in Punjab is that informal solar capacity in terms of a household putting up panels, that is mushrooming. Now that is coming to the point Bhutto once again make, that the first to exit as your consumer base would be the well-off consumers, because number one, they were paying their expensive electricity bills quite regularly, so they would be the first one to exit because they can afford to make that investment. Now again, then you would be left with the defaulters or people who are likely to default. So it's not only a shrinking base, but the probability of that base to default on their electricity bill would have increased also. So that is one problem, and even that shrinking base is thinking of how to consume less of electricity. So while they might not be investing in battery infrastructure, they would be still investing in a solar panel that allows them to run their fan or refrigerator at least in the daytime. So this is where we are. We do not have a renewable energy policy per se. The provincial government does not have a renewable energy policy. But I would look at it as a glass half full, because we are not saddled with that baggage which NEPRA carries in the sense of past mistakes or errors which are made. A provincial government can be a fertile territory to have a renewable energy policy which is much more modern and much more sort of responsive to what the market is.
Thank you, Sutsa, for giving us the governmental perspective. I would call in my World Bank colleagues and the representative from GIZ and ask them that the government here faces real concerns with the investment in the renewable space, and there has been a lot of talk about the climate finance and how this can be accessed. So. So how would these reps from GIZ and World Bank suggest that investment climate in Pakistan be improved? Thank you.
They have been preparing for quite long time making a proposal for GCF and other globally available climate financing. We started quite late, and although also our institutional capacity, although there is a desire and appetite in many institutions that they want to tap these resources on climate financing, but yet we still see, the capacities are not enabling them to make their desired project proposal submitted on time. And the GCF and other this long procedures also on monitoring and so on and so forth. So there are it's enhancing, but I think more institutional capacities are required, and more robust planning is necessary for tapping these resources. Of course, on the other side, like the challenging being faced in the power and in the energy sector, I think colleagues have well described it. It's not like a complicated, but it's rather like quite complex issue. There are some past, I would say, knowingly or non-knowingly, mistakes being made or negligence being occurred. But nonetheless, there needs to be, like the colleagues say, an integrated energy planning is really necessary in our opinion, considering also like the petroleum, the transport sector, and then maybe, that there is a way forward to address, at least in the future. But at the moment, it looks quite cumbersome, quite complex, and I think this kind of forums really allow this to raise it, a little bit, to bring it to the notice. There is participation from the provincial side, also from the federal government, and I think this needs to be taken forward, and also really institutions like you, there needs to be very precise research. It's sometimes also we make this analysis, but based on the feeding data, the research results are being compromised, at least in the past. Like colleague also somehow represented some of the predictions which went completely wrong, and in my opinion that's not the model which is doing wrong calculation, but that's mainly the data which was then entered maybe was not precise. So I think I must appreciate this input by colleagues here, World Bank,
Thank you.
IGC, and I think
Thank you, sir.
This need to be taken forward and further a little bit streamlined into concrete action. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Energy. So it had three components to it, and very briefly on those. The first component, we wanted to tackle the utility scale solar, and this was designed back in 2018 when we were trying. The World Bank stepped in, helped the Sindh government, dedicated land, helped them design the legal documents, the RFP packages for utility scale solar for 3 sites. One site would have been connected to the discos. It was HESCO, Manjan site, and 2 in KE. So fortunately, 2 KE RFPs are now in the market, and NEPRA approved them. There was couple of learnings from the Muzaffargarh site, and we let go of the tariff-based structure, and now they are in the market. So hopefully we will get some response. And over there, we have some confidence because the off-taker is KE. On the Manjand, we are still struggling with the interconnection, and then the transmission issues, and of course the grid reliability issue. Over there, the other 2 components were related to, one was related to the rooftop solar of public buildings, and the other was related to the standalone solar home kits. These 2 are progressing well, but now because solar panel prices have decreased so much, and the market has improved, and there is so much, I would say, demand. The demand is there. So now World Bank is sort of pulling away from this distributed solar part of the programs. Now, given our, I would say, lessons learned from the Muzaffargarh site, where the 600 megawatt, there was no bidding. It went to the market twice, and still there was no investor in the market. We want to see investors come in, and we have been working with our colleagues here with Planative and RELP to design a more programmatic approach to bring in renewables. For that, for example, and what do I mean by programmatic approach? So as NEPRA and other colleagues have highlighted all the issues, there's this viability issue, there's this intimacy issue. We need to see how we can support the system through across the value chain, and that brings in the transmission issues, as well as the distribution issues, as well as the market contracting issues, and also creating an environment where not only just going and pushing in for like a 600 megawatt projects, but rather like a planned 10-year or like a 15-year plan with more sort like 3,000 megawatt projects, and we approach it programmatically. So that's the World Bank stance for now.
Thank you.
India has now RPOs and RGOs. Renewable purchase obligation means every distribution company, what they want to sell, let's say 100 units, 30% should come from renewable. That was a long from 10 years. Now, 2 years back, they put RGOs, renewable generation obligations, guarantee origins, that whatever the generation participant is coming into the market, 30% has to be renewable. So such policy revamping, so the donors and IGC, World Bank and all together, such suggestions into the policy has been put into that one. On the PPA redesign, we don't have a potential. You terminate, you buy out. The point is open the market, then give that generator a space that I cannot buy with you, then you need to open the market. There is a termination clause. Buyback is already in every PPA into the Pakistan. So on that side, we have to give the market also options to the generator. Saying that terminate, it doesn't work, and so redesigning is there no potential for the next 10 years. Infrastructure is too much. Competition, policy, regulatory, everything is ready. Started. This is where
Thank you, Bhutto Saab. I'll call in the private sector, starting with Rizwan Fiaz Saab, Zishan Abbas Saab, CEO Renewables first, and also Sir you. And the question would be of a technical sort, because the government here says that this is not possible. There are so many challenges, and then the price of solar does not reflect the actual cost. So yes.
the reason, but the one side is being ignored, and that's really the elephant in the room. And we have to remember that a lot of countries have been ahead of us in this, and you have these concepts, the duck curve, the way the solar comes in. But in the last 2 years, something else has happened, which is the cost of batteries has gone down significantly. Today in Pakistan, a 5 kilowatt hour battery, which we will assume at a 90% is 4 kilowatt hour usable capacity, is for retailing at a price of about 300,000 rupees. 300,000 rupees divided by 4, because that's the size of the battery, 4 kilowatt hours, that gives you a price of 75,000 rupees per kilowatt hour. So you have, as a resident or as a company or as a customer, you're buying this at 75,000 rupees per kilowatt hour. I'm going to assume just a 5-year life cycle, which is actually very low. It's much higher than that. With a 5-year life cycle, 75,000 per kilowatt hour of capacity that you have purchased, which fits nicely in a convenient corner in your house. Divide that by 5, so you're paying 15,000 rupees per kilowatt hour per year. If I assume 300 cycles up and down, charging and discharging, that means once a day, and taking a few days off, and not even dividing it by 365, 15,000 divided by 300, I don't need a calculator to do this math. That's 50 rupees per kilowatt hour per cycle. So each time I use my battery for cycling 1 unit in and out, it costs me 50 rupees today. 3 years ago, this was about 120, 140. I am expecting, looking at the trends, and we've seen this, it's happened so many times. What's the law? Moore's law, where the price of the conductor sort of goes down. We've seen it on the mobiles, we've seen it on computers, we've seen it on solar panels, we've seen it on wind, and we are going to see it on batteries. From 50 rupees, if it comes down to half, that's 25 rupees. So each time I take a solar unit, which has been generated in the day, and I put it into my battery, I am actually only spending 25 rupees as a cost for myself. That's the price of taking a unit, putting it in the battery, and using it in the evening. What's the cost of solar then? What's the cost of the solar unit? With current prices, again, I'm going to zoom on the higher side a little bit. A megawatt project is about 100 million rupees. It's a very high, on the higher side. A 10 kilowatt project for a residential customer is about 120 rupees per watt. We can discuss the math, but roughly on a 10-year horizon, and you have inverters which have 5 years lives and panels which have 25, 30 years lives, and anybody who's in his house is looking for at least a 15, 20 years. The cost of a unit of electricity is about 7 rupees today. And this is also going down, but let's assume that this one has sort of, hit the top. So 7 rupees and 25 rupees, that's what it's going to cost a customer to disconnect from the grid completely. 7 and 25 is 32 rupees. We're getting our electricity, the cheapest rate possible for residential customers is around 50 rupees. There are a lot of customers who are going to defect, and there are a lot of customers who are going to go into the battery. The thing which regulators need to understand and the discos need to understand is that if the battery gets installed on that side of the grid, you're out of business, because it's becoming very, very feasible. It's becoming something which is very possible that a lot of the top, and they have a name for this, it's called the utility death spiral. What happens is the electricity sector, and I think this is one of the points which is mentioned here as well, is driven by fixed cost, which is the biggest component of your cost, but the billing is variable. So if you stop using it, and that's, as they rightly pointed out, I think Mr. Bhutta was saying that the elite customers are defecting. They're paying zero bills, but they're still using the grid system. Right now they're doing that because the net metering allows them to use the grid like a battery instead of using a battery itself, right? But batteries are becoming cheaper. So I think, we have to look at all of these factors, and it's still very important for us to look at the real potential of renewable energy. But I just wanted to sort of put this context in place that from a pricing point of view, we're looking at a situation where 50 rupees units are not going to sort of be feasible for even residential customers in the near future. So we should be looking at a scenario where the grid defection is a very real possibility. And look, we are not in the business of selling electricity. The DISCO is a distribution company. It's in the business of trading electricity. They need to understand that it doesn't matter whether you buy the electricity from Gharo or Muzaffargarh or wherever, or you buy it from Mr. Noman and you give it to Mr. Osman. It's a matter of trading electricity, right? So we have to sort of keep this in context. And of course, we have some solutions on this as well, and we'll discuss those as well. But I just want to sort of bring this context in place, that we're looking at a scenario where the price of electricity for the residential customer, especially the bigger ones or the ones who can afford a 10-year horizon, it's going to be cheaper than so it's not possible to not have grid defection unless we can significantly bring the cost down. And then what do we do? Like if we get more capacity up?
Excuse me, sorry, if you allow me, I just wanted to add something to what the gentleman said. There's an issue up here about how do we foster competition, and you mentioned how do we bring in private investment. So as he mentioned, there might not be an international market for international investment, but there's a very vibrant local market for renewables. Last year, 1,500 megawatts of net metered renewables were added to the grid. Using their numbers for cost, that's 500 million in investment that private Pakistani citizens put into renewables. So there is a market. There is no international market for international investment, but that's primarily because of the economic risks and the political risks in this country right now, and also the risks associated with the off-taker. Grid-scale projects might be backstopped by government guarantees, but investors understand that the sector as a whole is in a very weak state right now. And regardless of those government guarantees, it is still a risky investment. So those are the issues that need to be fixed if you want international investment. As far as local investment is concerned, that's coming in droves, and will continue to come in as long as tariffs are high and they keep rising.
Thank you, Irmina Thaiba. Rizwan followed by Zishan.
Following from what you said, my belief is that there is an international interest in investment as well, not just Western interest. That's the problem. Last year, you had very senior officials from the Energy Department of the US government visit, 2 visits, and there were visits which really resulted in nothing concrete. So one of my clients, Northern Power, which is in Muzaffargarh, they tried their best to get onto your Muzaffargarh project because they're in Muzaffargarh and they have the land. So it's an old thermal power plant, which is an RO4 plant. So it's going out of commission. It's 40 years old. The land is there. The evacuation is there. Everything is there. and yet we ran after US Exim, after USAID, no support. We ran after the government, no support. But we last week signed a MOU for 300 megawatt with a Chinese company. So from the Chinese side, there is a lot of interest in coming in, which has its own pitfalls, obviously. So really, we have to balance this thing about there not being interest from a certain aspect, a certain side of international investors, and a lot of interest from Chinese investors. And I think these ex-WAPTA GenCos, and I keep coming back to them because they represent an excellent opportunity for an early transition of these defunct thermal power plants, which have evacuation facilities, which have massive tracts of land, and they will be the cheapest way to go about it to convert thermal plants. And I think obviously PPIB end of it will represent a challenge, because right now under the PPIB law, it's not really possible. The SIFC is pushing these through, but something will have to change at Akil Saab's end for these to go through. But I think this would be a first great start. I have a question for Tim and Numair, that when you talk about buying out these old contracts, are we talking about basically paying off the IRR, that's it, and buying them out? And secondly, usually in these arrangements, is the practice to shut down the old thermal or to convert them to a take and pay model?
So what I had in mind was just the NPV, whatever. And typically that would be, you'd look at plants for which the capital cost is already paid off. So the debt is paid off. It's really just the flow of variable costs and variable revenues their way. So that's what I would have in mind. I won't pretend to give a strong stance on what should happen afterwards, whether they enter the merchant market, which seems reasonable. If they can strike bilateral contracts through CTBCM, why not? There's no need to literally close them.
But that obviously offsets the environmental...
So that kind of depends on what angle. So if you want to do climate financing, you have to show additionality. And you have to then say that I'm shutting down this power and
is that
replacing.
usually a condition of international finance for them, that you will shut them down? Because it is climate finance. So.
Well, if you look at things like the ADB's energy transition mechanism, it's generally implicit that this is done to open up the space. So I won't say more from a legal standpoint. I'm not that's not my strength, but I think it's definitely seen as a kind of creating the space for renewables to come in. If you want to bill it as an offset or some kind of additionality, you need to make that clear.
Thank you. Numair, you started off with mentioning government's failure in attracting investors for 600 megawatt Kotadu solar project. Akil talked about it, Bhutto talked about it, and they attributed it mainly to the macroeconomic situation and the high cost of finance. In my opinion, it has more to do with the historical missteps that we have taken, and it is actually a classic case of killing a robust market. We started our renewable energy journey well in time. The first policy came in 2006, and by 2015, the market started attracting investment, and in that year alone, the investments made in utility scale wind and solar were to come online. And though the decision was reversed in 2019, and a subcategory was created for the projects that were to compete with each other for their induction in the national grid, but not a single megawatt has been added so far. It took 3 years for us to basically come up with a consensus on ARE policy 2019, and it was approved in August 2020. Not a single megawatt has been added under that policy.
Thank you.
And then, in September 2022, we came up with this idea of, a solar fast track initiative. So, if you come up with new ideas every day and don't facilitate, investors and developers who have, invested their money already in projects that are at various stages of development, you would end up getting what we've got for this 600 megawatt solar project in Kotadu.
Thank you. I would now call Noman Saab and Miss Ayla, and if you can both please respond to some of the issues highlighted earlier. For example, Bhutta Saab said that there was a problem with demand forecasting on the long-term basis. I know that Lumps Energy Institute helps them forecast demand. How can we deal with this long-term challenge where the IGCIP has gone wrong? And also, if you can talk about some of the policy gaps that still exist, because you have a background of working with all these different agencies. So if you can both cover them, thank you.
Actually, we have a huge resource in a developing country like Pakistan. Having said that, again, a lot of people have raised the point of the true cost of renewable energies and what it would take to integrate them into the grid. So I'll start with that. And again, I'll just drive it from data-driven decisions. And in that, I mean, when we talk about, for example, some of the data, sometimes at the global level, when data is presented in terms of the cost of renewable energies and the trend it's taking, and when we compare it to the traditional energy supply power generation plants, there are ancillary services that are not taken into account, the support services that those plants can provide, and in many cases, renewable energy sources depend on those services to actually work effectively. So in that regard, I mean, we need to take into account the true cost. Having said that, I mean, coming to the numbers that Waqas Musa presented, his own numbers, 75,000 rupees per kilowatt hour, lithium-ion battery storage, expected life 3,000 cycles. The price is not going to be 25 rupees per unit cycled few years down the road. It is now, if you calculate the numbers. So at this point in time, again, it's not just the solar energy and the battery storage. Living off the grid, if you look at the true cost of integrating renewables, has other elements to it. And you need to look at the load, you need to look at the scalability and modularity of the system if you really want to live truly off the grid. Even with that, even at this point in time, the biggest chunk of our customers on the grid, the surprise is it's gone up to 80% domestic. They are the easiest to defect in terms of the energy and power requirements. That's the easiest load that can be addressed without the grid. And we are going to run into that problem where in places where we have the national grid, you have three main segments. You have industry, you have commercial, you have residential. Residential, from a technology perspective, easiest to defect and are already doing it, but they're doing it connected to the grid. So they're actually exploiting the grid and doing it. But even if they were to do it without the grid, they can do it in a cost-effective manner. The numbers tell that story. We talk about commercial. The highest tariff structure is for commercial. And again, when we talk about the per unit overall rate that the customers have to pay, we need to address the taxes and the percentage that gets added onto the tariff that the end customer has to pay. And it does not matter to the end customer whether it is coming from capacity or from energy, from cross subsidy, from stranded costs, from whatever. It's the end number that matters to the customer. And if the government thinks of electric utility to be the parking lot for all taxes, it is going to kill all activity within the country. And that is something that needs to be addressed. In terms of discipline, I mean, when we talk about stability of policy and regulation, it's actually the discipline. And in that, in the recent past, some of the levers have already come in place. IGCIP is a very effective lever in a power sector which is kind of now being debundled. That is one glue which can take into account the constraints of all the different players. It obviously, like everything else, would need to continually improve to make sure that the impact of everything is taken into account. But that is one tool that can actually do it. And when you look at the overall structure, 80% domestic defecting, adding grid connected renewables is, in my opinion, that is not even a direction that a country like Pakistan can take. In a comparison with a country like Vietnam, again, looking at it holistically, it's not just the what renewables can bring to the table, it is what they can bring to the table, taking into account the baseline that exists within the country itself, and what is going to be the overall impact to the end customers. Power sector is a very complicated entity. We can't just look at one perspective and start making arguments based on that. Again, renewables are one of the best resources we have, and we have 50 to 80 million people. For a country which is 10 times larger than Pakistan, like Australia, it's 2 to 3 times the entire population of Australia, which is not being provided with electricity. And at this point in time, it is not a luxury. It is a basic necessity to uplift them and to make them a productive part of the community. And that is where, in my opinion, renewables and their integration into a productive supply of energy supply can really help and benefit, uplift Pakistan as a country as a whole.
Thank you.
And
Thank you, Noman Saab. Ms. Aila.
And we need to sort of really get out of that. Obviously, a lot of sort of problems that have been put there on the table. There are solutions for each one of those. First of all, it is a reality that renewables is the present and more so the future. Because what we need to do, of course, we need to look at the demand side of things and how, and it has to be, of course, data driven. If there is an IGSEP that does not account for reducing the price of electricity, there'll be more and more customers that will, with certainty, go off grid. And there's data provided by the gentleman here as well, and we have this. If we look at the sort of generation cost from 2010 onwards, solar has come down by more than 80%. Wind has come down more than 60%. As we speak, last year there was investments in batteries to the tune of batteries development and research and all to the tune of about more than $35 billion. We need to grapple with the reality and also look at not just our current dynamics, the external ecosystem as well, and particularly from the perspective of innovation. The cost of batteries will come down. And again, Akhil mentioned, and some of the others also mentioned, with regards to having an integrated lens of when we view things and we plan for things. We cannot plan just in isolation of what our power system is. We need to look at what the overall energy demand is. What are the other drivers? What is the affordability of our country? What are the levers that we can sort of pull in order to sort of use for our benefit? And I know that there's a lot of this theme is around climate change. So I would just like to highlight that, yes, there are actually pots of money with no names. We can actually go claim those pots of money if we structure well. And just to give an example, like when we did the Indus bond for our dams to the tune of $500 million, the best names all over the world of the financial institutions like the Goldman Sachs and the JP Morgans and all, they came in investment because of the fact that they also have their own targets. In COP26, if you recall the number of climate finance that was mentioned, $130 trillion. Now, there is now at the same time, parallelly, what we need to do, also Tim, what you mentioned, we need to also look at that which of the plants, not of course all, but which of the plants we can retire and at the same time do the structuring so that we can benefit, we can pull in more resources and use it for our own benefit in order to improve the mix. Of course, it has to be like the stable grid, but of course at the right price. and then looking at that in terms of I mean, there is opportunity to even repurpose our existing assets. So they will not all of them will go stranded, but some perhaps they can go in the competitive market. I think we need to immediately open up CTBCM and have better price discovery, because if we just look at that we do not have either enough grid capacity, we can bring, with the right kind of structuring, we can bring in appropriate financing for our grid enhancement and then link that to some fossil fuel phasing out. I need to be practical, so I'll not say that we immediately switch off everything, but follow the trends. And then whatever global decarbonization frameworks provide support, we need to do that. Carbon credits is one of them. And I think cost decline is something that we need to look at from the perspective of the cost decline in technology. Overall, I feel that climate change and sort of the importance of it is a huge opportunity for the country. Now, what we really need to do is have an integrated policy framework, look at that, what our industry needs, what are the existing sources of energy that we have. We have a huge reliance on imports. We need to provide incentive in terms of the policy framework, in terms of the taxation, in terms of creating more indigenized equipment manufacturing in order to lower down the costs further. Dealing with the stock and the flow of circular debt will be done parallelly. So all of these pieces, they need to be, this is like a puzzle. But the good thing is we can solve this puzzle because we have the tools. So I think these are some of
Thank you, Ms.
things I would
Ayla.
like to
I'll now
mention.
call upon the academics that we have on the table, Dr. Teresa and Dr. Adil. We know that the renewable transition is taking place and the rich are benefiting. How can we make this more inclusive? How can we bring in the poor, and how can we support the small and medium enterprises? And following this, I would yes, and also you.
Just one interjection before Dr. Adil answers. So according to the solar panel importers, there are almost 3 times as many off-grid installations in Pakistan than there are on-grid. So if our total on-grid capacity is, say, about 2,000 megawatts, there's potentially 6,000 megawatts off-grid, and most of those are in low to middle-income homes. These are not high-end. So this is a bit of a myth that it's only the higher income group that's benefiting from solarization. It's also a huge benefit to the... So your answers would then be more useful to us in that context.
Thank you. Yes. Please.
You look at from equity angle, or you look at from the cost angle, or you look at it from natural endowment angle, solar is going to be very beneficial. Somebody can do the net present value of those benefits, and you compare them with what it'll cost to buy out the least efficient Gencos. It's a matter of simple financial structuring. I don't understand why the Ministry of Power is so hesitant to do this. I mean, it's not a complicated issue.
May I respond to this one? I think there is a lot of debate going on this.
It's a transition. It's a simple transition.
I completely not even thought about it. I'll hand over the floor to Dr. Teresa and
Okay, sure, thank you. Calculated that they're about, I'll talk about the environmental goods in general, not just about the energy related products, but the environmental goods, because this whole thing has an effect. So the demand for environmental goods is what's driving the need for these energy products, etc. So there's about $6 billion worth of imports that were done in this environmental goods in Pakistan, which can encompass all the other things as well. And about 38% was in renewable energy, right? Solar panels being the most important one there. So the environmental goods, we have actually classified with the OECD and the IMF classifications. We've used that and done this. So the idea here again is that majority of global trade in environmental goods again is solar power, but there is also cleaner and more resource energy efficient products like these lights, domestic appliances, etc., which need to become more efficient, even if, because as we have all this challenge, the energy related challenges, the demand for electricity and all with these ACs and all that will matter, right? So how efficient they are. So one of the things is that Pakistan generally has a very higher tariff rate than the regional counterparts on, as we've seen, non-environmental goods, but also on environmental goods, we have one of the highest rates in tariff rates in the region. So we about the average rate that we have calculated is about 11%. And we look at like India and all those, there's about 8%, and then China and Vietnam are much lower. Vietnam is about 2% for its environmental goods, but generally Vietnam has very low tariff rates on all goods that it imports. And then we look at the cleaner or more resource energy efficient products, the domestic appliances, ACs, etc. We have tariffs up to 30 to 25%, right, in that sense. So this again makes it very difficult for us to import, because one of the things that we want in this country is import substitution. So a lot of our policies, we end up making imports of energy efficient goods more expensive because the desire is to produce them locally, right? So that has another problem. Now that actually raises another question, is about the quality of goods that we produce in Pakistan. If we are going to have those, what about the non-tariff measures that we apply on these goods when we import? So what we see is that environmental goods hardly face there are any non-tariff measures or based on such as certifications, inspections, testing, labeling, etc. We don't have those kind of requirements from the government in that. The NTMs on non-tariff measures on these environmental goods are very low. If you look at China and Vietnam, Vietnam almost has NTM measures on all the goods that it imports. So it's about 100%. China has a very high percentage as well on environmental goods. So this has another implication on the kind of quality of goods that you end up importing. So if you import low quality goods, you're likely to be competing, even the domestic producers will compete with low quality goods and produce those energy inefficient goods at the end of the day. So that will have implications on what we produce here, right? So this actually gives us, we need to look at the kind of certification requirements that the world is applying on their products and how they are reducing inefficient products into the market as well. So one thing that is raised, I think, here in the discussion is that we have very cheap imports of solar panels. So one of the things that we find is that we have one of the cheapest imports of solar panels in the world. But on the other hand, wind power, interestingly, is one of the most expensive imports compared to the world average. When we look at the average price, wind power is very expensive in Pakistan, but solar power tends to be very cheap. So that again is very interesting in that sense, right? And then one of the points that I want to make is that recently we had a lot of these restrictions that we imposed, government trade payment related measures, etc., on the imports, the balance of payment measures. So this actually has had a lot of implications on how we import our goods. So about 40% of environmental goods were affected by these measures, which were to reduce import demand, right, to control a balance of payment crisis in that sense. So this is the government like putting LC requirements, or those will have implications on how we import these goods. So that's what the thing is. And then the other thing, the last point that I want to make is that along with we talk about energy efficiency, we need to digitalize our whole production processes as well as trade processes in the end of the day, make our cross-border whole trade processes in that sense more digitalized. That will have an impact on the savings that we have, environmental savings as well as cost and time savings and documentation savings, etc. That will actually help us import more goods. So the whole policy that I want to actually look at is a more holistic approach in that environmental climate change should be driving in terms of trade policy, etc. Thank you.
Dr. Theresa.
Sorry, do you want to impose taxes on solar panels? No. I'm completely against that. That would be so. I'm talking more about quality in that sense, that we need to move away from taxes. The world has moved away from taxes and tariffs.
Speaking, I'm not saying that I'm against it. I mean, sitting here as Pakistan Solar Association, we have been discussing this. I mean, a 5% or a 10% won't hurt if it helps the business. I was just asking. I don't know if I was not clear there.
Vakas?
Taxes are not always bad.
Yeah, I'm saying not averse to the idea. We can discuss that. I mean, the implications, everything. So.
Okay, so I'm probably delaying lunch by by speaking now, so I'll try to be brief. I definitely share Tim's optimism, regarding renewables, the power for renewables, especially for making manufacturing and exporting, exporters more efficient and competitive and productive. At the same time, these discussions about the expensive cost of thermal and the IPPs, has been going on for a long time, and I definitely don't have any solutions to those. In fact, the first time I came to the World Bank, first time I came to Pakistan was with the World Bank back in 2001 as a graduate student, working as a short-term consultant, and I learned about that whole issue, and it's still going on today, unfortunately. The reason why I think I was invited here was to talk a little bit about the work that the research that I'm doing, funded by IGC, and so we have a grant to do a research project on helping SMEs, and I guess we do have some larger firms on our sample as well, to sort of convince them of solar. And so we're doing sort of an RCT where we're going to have a set of questions, and then an informational intervention where we'll be talking about things like the very short time period for recouping the investment, requirements from buyers abroad, especially the EU with the CBAM, and their other initiatives. They have their whole circular sustainable garments initiative, and also the corporate sustainability initiative. All three of those potentially have a role to play in the future in terms of affecting the garment sector. And then also weighing that against concerns of firms, especially those who need to make large upfront investments in order to go into solar, and how that might affect their precautionary savings and cash flow. So along those lines, our survey is going to be hopefully going into the field very shortly. But what we've done so far is, we had done some preliminary surveys, first by phone, mainly focusing on Punjab, and then as part of our listing exercise, in order to get ready for this project. And some of the things that we were finding is, well, first of all, in areas such as Sialkot, a lot of the firms have already shifted to solar. So because there's so much solar penetration there already, and the Sialkot firms tend to be sort of at the vanguard anyway, we didn't even decide, we cut Sialkot off the list of areas where we wanted to do this project. The other thing that we noticed is that, from our listing exercise, about 26% of the firms, and this was in the textile sector and food and beverage sector, manufacturing sector, already are using solar, predominantly the larger firms, but some smaller and medium firms. And also the penetration is quite different. So as you go further south, there's less and less penetration of solar in manufacturing, even though the benefits are larger. So I guess Multan there was some, but Bahawalpur, almost none of the firms have it. Lahore, less than Sialkot, but not too bad, and Faisalabad kind of in between. So I think there's a lot of scope for that. And one of the things that I'm interested in learning about, especially from the solar providers, is because something that's being done in Bangladesh under something called the Greener Garments Initiative is that like some of the European buyers are working with solar providers to do these solar purchase power agreements where these companies, these energy service providers will be putting solar on factories and then maintaining them, doing all the upfront investment, and then selling the energy at a relatively cheap price to those factories. And just from my research online, I think there seem to be a couple of companies that are doing that in Pakistan, but I'm not aware of too many of them. And I think that would be a really exciting way to move forward, especially with smaller and medium firms, if they can qualify for those kinds of contracts, because I think smaller and medium firms are concerned about the upfront costs and what that would do to their sort of precautionary savings.
Thank you, Dr. Teresa. We know that the lunch is waiting. We'll have last few comments from Sajjad Mahmood Saab, followed by Adil Bandial, followed by Yaya. Please keep it precise and short. Thank you.
Let's understand that. So when we move towards the renewables, we make the national grid even more unreliable. And we have seen a wide countrywide shutdown. So any renewable transition discussion cannot be completed unless we also talk about evacuation and also transmission network and the grid. it is interrelated. Even disaggregated solar panels, be it on certain business units or the manufacturing units, and their reverse metering also have an effect on the grid as well. So we need to see that. We had an extended discussion with NTDC, and we realized that all renewables are only available for certain period of time, even hydro. That cannot make up for a reliable base load for the economy. So not all the lights goes off as the sun goes down. Not all the lights go off as the waters or the dams are not releasing water for the agriculture purposes. We still need the base load. So we need to have that equation done properly so that we can make a meaningful transition from existing mix of the energy from where it is being produced. Yes, solar makes up a good economic and business sense. Dr. Teresa, there are ESCOs now. There are about more than 50 of them who are aggregating demand and providing the same solutions, but their penetration to SME sector is minuscule, negligible. I just wanted to lay down that because national grid as such and the distribution and transmission network makes a good part of this equation. Unless we look into the investment which is concurrently required, we won't be able to give any plausible solution.
When a consumer leaves the grid, the impact is not just that it's not just that they're not going to be buying electricity from the grid anymore, but that the regulator is also losing the occasion to regulate that particular consumer because they're not there anymore. There's no opportunity for a distribution company to send a bill to charge them any fixed cost or have any sort of interaction in that respect. So the suggestion there is that if you are to introduce solar, which is it is to come, it's preferable that this solar induction be effected through the grid rather than enabling people to achieve it from outside the grid, because then you're making pockets within the market that will be totally unregulated. And it's happening in Punjab. Like, I have drawn up contracts for companies that are setting up solar plants on their roofs or on their large areas and through financing, and they're just supplying to themselves. And the distribution company, they're severing their contracts with the distribution company in connections. They need to give a 1-year notice under Section 22 and they're out. And then the distribution company can do nothing. So the preference should be to enable them to achieve solar power, but through the grid system as opposed to outside.
Thank you.
I made a point that the difference between some of the points you said are correct, but they're ignoring one basic thing, which is the elephant in the room, which we say is the battery. The battery today has reached a level where what you're saying is kind of moot, because if the battery gets installed on that side of the grid, Mr. Regulator, you're out of the picture.
Yeah.
If the battery gets installed on your side, so what we should be looking at really is, and I said we'll talk about solutions, I didn't really get a chance, but I think one of the things which the regulators really need to look hard right now is how does the battery get involved in the Pakistan grid 5 years down the road? Does every neighborhood grid station have like a container-sized battery, the kind which Tesla has been pushing, or the kind which LG Chem has been pushing? I'm not talking about the batteries which I talked about. These are like the small ones, these are expensive. Batteries which are even cheaper, which are like, which are the kind which Salman, I saw Salman the Rion gentleman, which they're installing megawatt-hour sized batteries, the best systems of a lot of factories and things like this. That's the one which we need to look at. If we don't do this, you know what's going to happen? Today on my desk, in my office, there is no phone. When I was growing up, when we moved our house, getting a phone was so important. Getting that landline was so important because that's the number which everybody called you on. Today, the only reason I have a landline number on my business card is so that you guys don't think it's a Mickey Mouse card. Nobody answers that call. You don't want that to happen to the grid, right? You don't want it to be a situation where nobody loves the electricity company. Nobody loves their bank. Nobody loves their electric company. It's a universal truth of life. Usually people are dissatisfied. If you give them a chance to defect, they will. And that's, I think, where we need to sort of really focus on them, how we plan the future of the electric grid at Pakistan.
Thank you. Yahya, final comment.
Sure, I'll try to be super quick. First of all, Tim, I would like to change your statement about stability is king. I think cash is king. We haven't seen a poor king ever. So leading from that should be a big evidence for everyone that solarization is happening a lot, and this number is from 2021, not like latest numbers. So we'll see more of conversion later on. I think one element we have missed a lot. So residentials, we can see that they're going to convert. The biggest losers are going to be the commercial users, because they don't have a roof where they can put the solar panels. And this is I think might be most concerning, because earlier we talked about that economy is not growing, there are low job opportunities, and with almost 100 rupee unit for the commercial users, I don't think that's going to improve anytime soon. Having said that, there's a big opportunity for anyone if they want to put some money into it. I'm working with a client who are offering infrastructure and cheap electricity as services. So we are putting a 30-acre facility in Nooriabad near Karachi, where we are offering electricity that's going to be primarily sourced by wind turbines, 7.5 megawatt to be specific, along with some grid electricity. So that's another area that might come up rapidly in the future to facilitate the commercial areas. Last thing, we have seen that we have talked a lot about that rapid solarization is going to happen, but someone mentioned that we might still need some base load, and I also can verify that from one of the research project I worked on myself. So it was on willingness to pay for reliable electricity supply, and there's higher willingness to pay for reliable electricity supply. People are willing to pay slightly more if there's less load shedding and if the quality of electricity is better. So I'll just I think pause here. Thank you.
Thank you, Yahya.